Hey everyone, this is Chuck at That Rhythm Man Guitars, and I've got a little something special for you today, something you don't always get a chance to do or see or hear. And this is going to be a comparison of 4 of the golden era Archtops spanning from the mid-30s into the early mid-50s. All of these are the big guitars of the era. So we're looking at a 1935 Super 400. Over here on this side, a 1950 Gibson Super 400 CN, a 1953 D'Angelico New Yorker, and all 3 of these guitars are called 18-inch guitars. I measured all of them just so we'd have some completeness, and all of these measure 17 7/8 inches in width at the lower bout, so from here to here. And then over on this side, which I may have the microphone blocking a little, is a 1948 Stromberg Master 400, which measures a full 19 1/8 across the lower bout. So you're looking at this one's 1.25 inches larger than all the others, but that was kind of how they did it. And for another little interesting bit for this, we have some differing bracing. So the 1935 Super 400 has X bracing, which was typical of the early Super 400s. The Super 400 CN from 1950 has parallel bracing and obviously has a cutaway. The D'Angelico New Yorker has X bracing, so these two are the same size but braced differently. And also these both have a cutaway. And these two in Sunburst do not have cutaway. And the Stromberg has a single brace running transversely across the top. So 3 different kinds of bracing, 2 different sizes, although the biggest that each of the makers built, 2 with a cutaway, 2 without. So we've got some differences, but all of the big guitars of the era. Now I'll show you just some details of these guitars individually for those who are interested. And we start with the headstock. In 1935, we're looking at a guitar that would have, well, it has the same size of headstock. It does have the script instead of the later Gibson logo. And see if you, I don't know if you can see this, but interestingly, they did these tuners that had engraving on the buttons at the time. These are Grover tuners. Very cool. Back of the headstock has the inlay that Super 400s carried throughout. Back of this particular one is bubble maple, which they used a lot of in the pre-war for L5 and Super 400s. Flame maple neck, and really intricately engraved tailpiece. So, top of the line guitar for Gibson in 1935. So this 1935 Super 400 actually is also the only one that I know the provenance of to any extent at all. This one was owned before me by Roy Clark, who many of you know from many of his TV appearances, in particular Hee Haw, which he was on basically every week. But this was one of his guitars. The other guitars, I have no idea of their history. Next, just continuing the Gibson theme, I have the 1950 Super 400. Headstock is going to look very similar, different tuners, later Gibson logo. These are the seal fast version with the keystone or tulip buttons. The tailpiece still has engraving, but is not nearly as fancy as they were back then. So they had cut down on a lot of those little specifics, but they still had very high-end features. Binding was the same. They didn't change that. This particular one is also a variation of bubble maple for the back. Somewhat different, obviously from a different tree, I'm sure, much later. But larger bubbles and a more pronounced grain pattern. This particular guitar has one of the most striking maple backs I've ever seen on a Gibson guitar. Moving on to the D'Angelico New Yorker, this one has all of the D'Angelicos had after this tailpiece was invented, or mostly almost all. Has the engraved stair-step gold tailpiece and the kind of Super 400 style inlays. This particular one has the headstock without the finial. It has the typical New Yorker inlay here and does not have a truss rod. Some of them at this point would have, I think, but this one does not. Has a flamed maple back with a flamed one-piece maple neck in contrast to the Super 400s, which had multi-piece necks. And I want to go ahead and point out that all of these guitars, with the exception of the 1950 Super 400, have ebony fingerboards. This happened to be during a period when Gibson didn't have a good enough supply of ebony, and a lot of these guitars got Brazilian rosewood, which is what this one has. And lastly, the big one, the Stromberg Master 400. As with most of the guitars here, well, all of the guitars here, they have the fanciest features that they did. So mother of pearl inlays with Stromberg 400, Boston, Massachusetts. Again, inlays that are kind of similar to Super 400. These have not as many pieces, of course, but still pretty similar. And no truss rod in this either. The Gibsons are the only ones here that have truss rods. This one does have a replacement tailpiece and a replacement bridge. And flamed maple back and a cool back of the headstock with this overlay pattern here. It does have early patent pending Grover Rotomatics on it rather than the original tuners, which probably were seal fasts also, but these Rotomatics work so great that I wanted to just leave them on. So there are the 4 guitars, and next we can just give them a listen. Okay, so first we'll hear a little comping rhythm, just basic. Okay, now we'll hear a basic melody line that could accompany the comping that we heard before. Okay, now a bit of kind of a chord melody that allows a lot of the strings to ring out, so you can kind of compare how they resonate and how they sustain. Okay, and now just to finish the comparison, some Freddie Green style comping. All right, so there you have it. 4 golden era, big-bodied archtops, starting with this 1935 Gibson Super 400 and running all the way into this 1953 D'Angelico New Yorker. I'd love to hear what you all think as you listen to this video, and maybe break it down to the different styles and which ones you think excel at the different types of playing. So only one of these guitars is currently available at thatrhythmman.com, and that would be this 1950 Super 400. The others, the D'Angelico New Yorker is just here visiting for a short while, and the Stromberg and the Super 400 from 1935 both stay here all the time. If you're interested in this Super 400, let me know. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Take a look at what else we have. We have some other great guitars, and I'm available to discuss any of them if anybody's interested. Thanks.